All right, hi everyone. In my thumbnail, I was trying to look cool or something, but I ended up just looking angry. So those authorization messages on my phone. I'm sorry, this video is starting badly. Okay, so this week we're on Exodus 2. Now we've gotten through Exodus 1, which is basically the setup, where Israel's at, what's going on with Pharaoh, and now we're going to talk about Moses specifically. So I have some extra notes in the bottom of these studies just for fun, nerdy Bible stuff for me, but it's important that Moses is a Levite. He'll set up the priesthood later. So what we see right away is that Moses is born into a tough situation, right? They're killing the babies. It's about as tough as it gets. So nonetheless, Moses is born during this tough time. And I think it's remarkable to remember that Israel had been in Egypt for like 400 years. And it's during this time, the time that things are particularly hard, that Moses, kind of the savior of the people, is born. One thing I hope you see right off the bat is that Moses is kind of um, is kind of like a pre like a picture of Jesus before Jesus comes. So just keep that in mind. I hope this comes clear at the end of the study when you're looking at it. Um, so anyway, just keep that in mind as we go here. But Moses is born right in the middle of this time. And I have you looking in the first set of questions here at some of the other biblical births that have occurred against the odds. You've got Isaac, Samson, Obed. That's Ruth's son. Samuel. How about Jesus? You know, the virgin. That's about as unexpected as it gets. So think about that for a minute, and then we're going to focus in on the story of Obed, who was born to Ruth. The story of Ruth is crazy. Ruth kind of goes back to with Naomi to the Israelites, ends up marrying Boaz, and gives birth to Obed. And the end of Ruth tells us why that story is so remarkable, namely that is the line through which David will come. And of course, Jesus comes from the line of David. So it's against all odds, again, that Obed is born, that Jesus comes about. So what we see right off the bat is that God often works things out in these very unexpected ways. And that's my next question here. What do we learn about God's character? We learn that God is God is sovereign even over difficulty in our world. Uh, he doesn't bring about these great heroes of the faith, of the people who lead to Jesus, through kind of conventional expected circumstances. He brings them about through really unexpected, miraculous circumstances. And I think that part of what he's trying to communicate here is, you know, I am God and you are not. Like I am the one that's working out my salvation. You aren't manufacturing it. The history of salvation takes very unexpected turns and works in unexpected ways. So keep that in mind here, that's really what God is doing. There's a reason that Moses is born under such oppressive circumstances. It shows us God's power and his might to save despite the odds. I think what's also kind of funny here is that um, Pharaoh's own plans start working against him, right? Like he wants to kill all the Israelite babies, and yet one of those very same babies comes to Pharaoh's daughter and is brought into Pharaoh's house. There's tons of questions about whether or not Pharaoh knew who this child was, what his ethnicity was, so on and so forth. I don't really think there's a way to answer those questions. You can kind of guess based on what happens a little bit later when Moses kills the Egyptian. But suffice to say that God is working Pharaoh's plans against him. He's flipping them on his head. And that should be very encouraging to us. Because even when things seem hard, the unexpected way that God works can give us hope. Even when things seem really bad, we never know what God is up to behind the scenes. So it's just something that can kind of like, bolster our faith when circumstances tell us otherwise. So What is particularly powerful there about God bringing his servant Moses right into Pharaoh's house? I think what's amazing about that is that God does not render salvation. He doesn't bring about salvation just like from afar, right? He doesn't just say like, "Okay, you're saved," right? How did he bring about salvation? Through Jesus becoming man, he came right into the heart of the problem. So you see Moses going right into the heart of Pharaoh's house, right into the center of the oppression, right into the center of the wickedness against Israel. And it was from that place that God is going to bring about salvation for his people. Jesus says that for us, right? He comes into the midst of the valley of the shadow of darkness, the shadow of death, and he walks with us there and he brings us out of it. So I think just as a beautiful way that God works, and we can see a glimpse of that as Moses heads to Pharaoh's house. Now, in verses 11 through 15, Moses is gonna kill someone in anger. He's going to kill an Egyptian for oppressing one of his people, and then later he's going to kill, or he's not going. Sorry, that's the only person he kills that I know of. But later he's he tries to mediate between two Israelites, and they're like, "Who are you? You killed a guy." And Moses runs, right? And he runs. It says, when Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled. There's a lot of questions about what's going on here, but I think we get the general idea. Moses, kind of a child who beat the odds, the Israelite who is raised to a place of prominence, is now on the run. This can seem like a hiccup in the life of Moses, right? It can seem like a detour for him. That I think that's far from the truth. I think that this season of Moses' life, his life in Midian, like burning bush, which is about 40 years, we think it's about that, is critically formative for Moses. He is going to change and grow. And I think that we see this really in verse 22. When Zipporah gave birth to a son, Moses named him Gershom, which means, it's kind of supposed to mean, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. So Moses is born low, he's brought high, and now he's brought low again. And I think that's important because finally, Moses is going to be able to identify with his people. I like a quote here by Peter Enns: Moses is an alien, as are his Israelite countrymen in Egypt. He is finally experiencing their plight. He assumes their lowly position. See the picture of Jesus in this, please. Moses is walking the path of his own people before he can become their savior. Does that make, not capital S savior mean necessarily, but he delivers them. He is walking their path, and in the same way, Jesus walked our path as man. And so again, we see a picture of what Christ is like in the life of Moses. Moses is humbled through this. He is brought low, and he comes to the point where he's ready to be called by God. Although he maybe thinks a little, I don't know. I don't know if he thinks not enough of himself at the burning bush, or if he just doesn't want to go back. I don't know what the situation is, but there's a sense of humility here where Moses is kind of brought to this lowly position. And I think we can relate to Moses here. That's what my little Romans 8:28 section has to do here. We can relate with Moses because I think that oftentimes we mark our life by what happens to us. Like that we characterize our life or judge our life by what is happening day to day in our life. But really, in this I have Peter Enns again here. The mark of a Christian life is not what happens to us, it's what happens in and through us. And so these seasons where we feel like our life gets detoured, where we're brought into the desert, are often some of the most important seasons of our life to bring us humility and to bring us closer to God and for Him to prepare us for what He is doing, for what He wants to do in and through us. So in times of where we're experiencing loss of our dreams, loss of our hopes, great pain, whatever it might be, don't diminish that pain. It's hard. But we can also take heart in knowing that God is working things out for our good and His glory, whatever that might mean. It's probably going to mean something different than what we had expected. And finally, we must note that this season of Moses' life is not just about him. Sometimes I think we go through these detours in our life and we think like, man, this was God grew me. That's true, but that's not it. Humility is not just for Moses. It's for the sake of God's plan for his people, and the same is true for us. Okay, so I couldn't help it, but I've already hinted at this. We have to see Jesus in this story of Moses. Moses begins to embody the life of Israel. And you see that in a few ways. Both are saved by passing through the reed, some sort. It's really interesting that they talk about Moses's basket being amongst the reeds. The Israelites are saved through the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds. Both live in exile in a foreign land. Both will come out of Egypt and live for 70 years. It's easy to see how Moses kind of embodies the life of Israel. His life is like a microcosm of what Israel goes through. At the same time, I've already said Moses is a prototype of Jesus. Jesus comes out of Egypt as a child and escapes being killed as an infant. You hear Moses there. Jesus passes through the waters in baptism. The Exodus, passing through the Red Sea, is famously a prelude, a foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do with us and how we pass through the waters of baptism. And you recall that Jesus was baptized, and then he goes into the desert for 40 days as Israel passes through and goes through the water for 40 years. Most importantly, well, I don't know if most importantly, but a point to notice is for this story today is that both Jesus and Moses are rejected by their people, but this rejection serves as the means for bringing about God's purposes. It's very interesting that Moses gets to the desert not directly because he killed someone, but because his people kind of brought it to light. Look at there in verse 14. I don't know how Pharaoh heard of it, but it's very interesting that Moses' people, Moses was trying to intercede for his people. He was trying to do something good for them so that the Egyptians wouldn't oppress them. And yet his people rejected him. And we do the exact same thing to Jesus. Though he is trying, now Jesus maybe acted a little more uprightly than Moses, of course. But when Jesus tries to intervene, how often do we reject him? When he has good things for us, we push him away. But we can see that when the people rejected Moses, it put him out into the desert, and that was how Moses got ready for the salvation of his people. And in the same way, the rejection of Jesus led him to the cross, which is, of course, the means of our salvation. My mind explodes when I think about these things, and I won't talk anymore about it. But what we can see is a few things. First of all, Jesus being incarnated is the way that he identifies with us. He humbles himself. Read the first part of Philippians 2. That is crucial to the whole picture. Hebrews 4 tells us that's crucial. Jesus is the Savior through suffering. I'd like you to talk about what that means, what it means that he's a Savior through suffering. I think I've spoiled it all here in my video for you guys, but yeah, what does that mean? And it's important to note that Christ can only truly defeat death, not just for himself, but for us, by enduring it. Light must go into the darkness to shine. That should humble us, and it informs the way that we carry the light of the gospel. All right, just close by saying this. This chapter ends with a sign of hope. Things seem pretty bad, but 23 to 25, you hear God listening. This can be very comforting to us when we don't feel like God is listening. It can also be frustrating because you're like, well, you're listening, and yet here I am. Be honest about that. But this chapter encourages us to trust God, even when we don't see that he's working. We see God at work here, even when his name doesn't appear very much in this story. God is about to show up in a big way in chapter 3. Okay, I've been like preaching at you today. Sorry about that. I'd like you to take some more time to write this week. I know that I'm doing that. I did it last week, but I really like to encourage people just to be alone with the Lord and write out how you've seen this story play out in your own life, this story of God redeeming your suffering. I have some questions for you to think about. All right, that's it for today. See you soon.